Heretical Thoughts on the New Normal by Dick Turner and his fellow heretics.
Read by Dick Turner, Naia Nisnam, and tentatively a convenience.
Heretical Thoughts on the New Normal, footnote 1. Who are the heretics? In March 2020, in an exchange of emails with my friend, tentatively a convenience, we both mentioned that there was something about the COVID pandemic and the accompanying panic that was being created in the media that seemed odd to us. He said that several of his friends with whom he was also in contact shared the same feeling. This led to his creation of a group which he named the Heretics. It was made up of 6 people from all over the world. In this group we exchanged, via emails, videos, articles, our experiences and thoughts as things unfolded around us. Perhaps due to the various lockdowns and the isolation they imposed upon us, these exchanges took on a great importance to all of us. A lot of material was discovered, shared, discussed. Later that same year, tentatively a convenience decided to publish a book made up of these mails, consisting of many of the articles we shared and personal essays. This book, published at his own expense, was called Unconscious Suffocation: A Personal Journey Through the Pandemic Panic. It was among the first books published on the subject of the COVID pandemic. It is over 1,000 pages long. It is a unique document combining fact, personal experience, and at times, at least in my case, the psychological stress of dealing with a situation tantamount to imprisonment, the lockdowns, and the slow introduction of the new normal. End of footnote. Why this present text? From the very first, I was struck by how the concept of the new normal suddenly came fully formed into the public consciousness. I had the feeling that the script had been written beforehand, and it was simply being read, for from the very first of the pandemic, I kept hearing that everything we knew was going to change, that we were entering a new era. It was like a mantra in the mainstream news media. But how could anyone know? It seemed awfully odd to me to make such a definitive pronouncement, considering that the situation hadn't had the time to become fully established. Normally, events develop within the human sphere bit by bit, taking shape over time, forming in the public's mind, but now we heard constant announcements of what was to be. It was our job simply to accept whatever came our way. These announcements were referred to by the heretics and elsewhere as the official narrative. This was the official line from which no deviation was possible and no alternative was offered. That is, it was presented to the public in a top-down manner as the way things were going to be from then on, period, end of report. But life isn't like that. We never know what tomorrow may bring, so how could such a definitive version of our future be known before it took place? Well, it didn't take long to discover Event 201 and the various future scenarios that had been planned out for us. First Agenda 2020, then Agenda 2025, and to stay up to date, Agenda 2030, all concocted by the World Economic Forum, the Rockefeller Foundation, and others. All these things came out slowly, and they keep coming out, as, for example, lately, I am writing in February 2022, the existence of the young global leaders of the World Economic Forum and its infiltration to most major world governments. This is making its way into various news sources both above and underground. My guess is that this is a timed leaking of information supposed to normalize it into the public's consciousness. As I mentioned above, this new, rapidly arriving reality is presented to us as having no alternative. It's just what is happening. It is the new normal. That's it. Get used to it. There is no option. This is strange, of course, for those of us who believe that we live in a free society. In a free society, by its very definition, one has options. This essay was inspired by the following mail by my fellow heretic, Naia Nisnam.
I have been thinking a lot about what Dick had said several emails back, something to the effect of how do we get out of this mess without a plan to move forward with. It's that same old story where I can list all the things I'm against, and maybe have some vague idea of a more ideal world, but zero ideas about how to get us there. I see organizations like the World Freedom Alliance trying to come together and form a new way forward, but I don't know how successful they could possibly be, and my knee-jerk reaction is to distrust any group that wants to put forward a plan for the future of the entire planet.
She hit the nail right on the head, for the problem is that some sort of worldwide plan is just another form of control, fascism, totalitarianism, whatever you want to call it, whether it is put into place for our own good or not. Who needs it? Who wants it? In fact, this is just the kind of solution that the World Economic Forum, Gates, the Rockefellers, etc., are seeking to impose upon us. I call it managerial totalitarianism. No, the time for that sort of global control solution is over. It is time for a much simpler solution, one which will be proposed at the end of this essay. I wrote a mail to the heretics as a first step towards formulating some such idea to combat the one being forced upon us. As with the first book of the heretics, Unconscious Suffocation, this present text is meant simply to try to raise public consciousness and the desire to ask questions. For any effort in the direction of combating the new normal won't be wasted. First Mail by Dick Turner. We are currently being told that we are living according to a set of ideas which have reached their end. It's time for a change. Here it comes, ready or not. Normally, we think of change coming as a result of natural processes, organic, coming out of some process of evolution. The light bulb was invented, it was useful, so it stuck. So it's strange to feel that the new set of ideas has been planned out for us, for our own good. The question of what will replace the old ideas is what is producing the feeling of hopelessness and fear of what is to come. It is also what is fueling the rabid need for people to believe what are, in many cases, clearly outright lies. Why all the deceit on the part of those who would be our masters? Why not just put these ideas out there and let the market, that is the people, decide? First, what is the new normal which is currently being foisted upon us? The new normal, as far as I can tell, is the rise of a managerial class to predominance. At first glance, this may not seem so bad, because the idea is that they will run things well, efficiently, etc. The problem with managers is that they are essentially inhuman in their judgments because what counts is productivity, not existence. It always gets down to the bottom line. A hidden problem with managers is that they usually have a very high opinion of themselves because they have risen to high positions in a certain structure, and thus, though often intelligent in the sense that they are capable of highly concentrated work, they are incapable of seeing that they are often completely devoid of any real form of creativity. Why do they say that in the future you will own nothing and be happy? Because the flow chart tells them that will happen. If this is correct, and the new normal is the rise of a managerial class, why has this come about? It seems to me to get down to the nature of history in a capitalist society. My gut feeling is that we are simply caught up in linear history and that it is essentially unnatural and destructive. Marxists say that our form of history, one that requires constant growth, is a result of the need for capitalist markets to ever renew themselves, to expand. This seems reasonable to me as an explanation. A business either grows or it fails. The funny thing is, though we are caught up in this linear mode of existence, I don't think we, as human beings, like it. It's like we are being goaded on like cattle. I say this because almost everyone I've ever met seems to have nostalgia for the past, a past they know they will never see again. Things used to be better. What this means is, in the nonlinear past of my memory, there is an ever-recurring reality which is better than the present, soon to change unreality, which leads only to more unknowns. The alternative form of history would be cyclical, like the seasons, like life itself. Cyclical history has variation, but it doesn't have transformation. That is, there is no before and after like history as we know it. It is not growth-oriented, but rather life-oriented. I doubt seriously if within nonlinear societies that nostalgia plays any role at all. Why would it? They know that there will always be another spring, summer, fall, and winter. I researched whether or not any of the American Indian tribes ever wrote history books. Not surprisingly, they didn't. They didn't need to. It would have been redundant. I looked up one of the African words for history. It's the same as the word used for one's reputation. Think about that for a minute. History is the history of your own life within a context. That seems endlessly sane, fully human to me. I think we are caught up in a mode of existence which we know, deep down inside, is false. I've heard people remark on a number of occasions how the world often seems fake. Maybe this is the reason. It is fake because we are living an unnatural lie. Unsurprisingly, linear history doesn't accept the idea of cyclical history, thus the systematic destruction of all tribal peoples throughout the ages. The idea of non-progress-oriented peoples is just unacceptable to the linear mode of thought, of being. So we wipe them out using theories like manifest destiny, enslave them, colonize them, etc. And in so doing, they became footnotes to our history. How to escape linear history, stop waiting for something to happen and just exist, though it may sound strange, seems to me to be the solution for the world's ills. I believe the solution is that people realize that they have a choice, that they are free. Not just free in the sense that laws say they are free, but free in the transcendental sense to conceptualize other modes of the historical time experience. Maybe it gets down to the slogan, "Just say no," on a metaphysical scale. We need to visualize what a progressive society could be, which is not driven by greed, authority, and dissatisfaction. Response by tentatively a convenience.
I think that's all very astute, Dick. Another important facet of cultures that live in cyclical time is non-ownership of the planet. The forced progress of capitalism and its notion that the world's resources can be owned by some and sold to others, not to mention polluted, is very destructive. Wars are often fought over which nation owns which land, etc. An odd side note for me personally is that I recognize that I find linear notions much more exciting and engaging than circular ones. For example, I have a fair number of recordings of First Nations music, and I've never been able to feel engaged by it. At the same time, Western avant-garde classical is the music that thrills me the most, the music that's the most based on notions of linear progress. As for how these insights apply to shrugging off the new normal, what little hope I have is still based in individualistic critical thinking becoming common. That's probably been my hope my whole life, and something most fostered by the avant-garde music referred to above. It's also something I perceive less now than ever. In my opinion, this is because crowd psychology, mass manipulation, has been applied more successfully than ever before. Then again, the current progress is likely to collapse simply because capitalist progress is unsustainable. There's a life and death cycle that's intrinsic to everything. The more the new normal continues its parasitic growth, the more it's likely to kill off itself and or the host it's dependent on. Therefore, my hope is based on the new normal self-destructing. Alas, the more the medical-industrial complex introduces GMOs, the more extremely corrective I think the natural backlash will be. In Michael Crichton's novel State of Fear, he denies the idea that there is a balance of nature. It seems likely that this denial is common to the people who are pushing the new normal. I still believe that a balance of nature exists. I think that if you dig a hole, it's bound to fill with water. If you start a fire, the burning is likely to spread, but something's likely to happen eventually to put that fire out, etc. It seems to me that the global planners are essentially trying to control the weather, to eradicate nature, including human nature. I take it for granted that nature is immeasurably more powerful, and I'm glad of it.
Second Mail by Dick Turner. In my first mail, I suggested that there are two forms of historical movement, and that the one we are caught up in may not be the best for us as human beings. I emphasize the words human beings, for the human being as we currently know him, that is, as we know ourselves, is still a part of nature. We are still, at the bottom of our beings, cyclical. In our case, this is expressed by the cycle of birth, a coming to maturity, reproduction, a decline and death. Then, through our children, it happens again. Each new person is a separate individual, but the form of being is identical. We see that there is variation, but not transformation. That is, the human being, as a being, stays the same. His experience will vary through time, however, for he is free. It is therefore interesting, and perhaps not too surprising, to see that the current phase of our capitalistic linear society has introduced the idea of transhumanism as part of its program. Transhumanism is the fundamental alteration of the human being. It is, as the word itself suggests, transformative. That is, as I wrote in the first mail, there will be a clear before and after. It removes the human being from nature, or rather, removes nature from the human being. This would be, I believe, the last transformation in our current linear capitalistic world history. I say the last because we are now living the history of human beings. I cannot conjecture as to what a non-human history would be, or even if it could exist, just as I cannot conjecture as to the experience of any non-human form of existence, whether it be a single cell, a meteor, or baobab tree. I would allow myself to conjecture, however, that curiously, the move towards a non-human society seems like an attempt to create a man-made cyclical existence. I say this because, if we are to become machines, and we know that once the process starts it will not end, like tweaking something until none of its original parts exist any longer, then we have the right to apply what could be called machine logic to the existence that would result. Machines exist in three modalities. Once invented, they are improved upon. New ones invented, and old ones, that is, those that no longer serve a useful purpose, are discarded. If this process is embarked upon in application to the human being, I think we will tweak ourselves out of existence. Then, once we are no longer human, that is, no longer part of nature, we will as human beings, by definition, cease to exist. Like it or not, the universe is a natural object subject to natural laws. What the new technological man would be, and what his longevity would be, I cannot say. I will say, however, it doesn't give me cause for optimism. As I wrote above, natural, that is, cyclical existence in our case is expressed by the cycle of birth, a coming to maturity, reproduction, a decline, and death. Under the current rules, this is just a fact. This seems to be abhorrent as a conception to a certain portion of current society. There seems to be a refusal on the part of a great number of people to accept the position that life has assigned them. This is clearly expressed in the ever-growing revolt against naturally assigned gender roles. I have seen occasional references in various non-mainstream media sources that this dissatisfaction over one's naturally assigned gender role is being encouraged artificially by the forces of capitalism expressly to garner support for its larger plan. This may seem a lot to suggest, but it has been clearly established that the media, including not just news sources but popular entertainment vehicles, have been used for a long time as arms of the capitalist linear agenda. This demonstrates pretty clearly that the whole process of the so-called new normal and the implementation of a biotechnocratic state, while being presented to us as some sort of continuation of an overarching historical process, is nothing more than the imposition of a certain set of plans by the managerial class they have created for that very purpose. One might ask why people are unhappy with their naturally assigned gender roles. That is, why are they dissatisfied with what they innately are? Dissatisfaction is motivation. It is simply that dissatisfaction with oneself is the reigning modality of existence in capitalist linear society. This dissatisfaction with one's basic self is endemic and constantly encouraged. It is expressed unendingly in various forms. It is what motivates most people in capitalistic linear society. It is, at its base, an inculcated form of self-hatred that has grown up concurrently with capitalist linear development. Every advertising slogan, when reduced to its most common denominator, could be summed up as, unless you buy into this capitalistic concept, as represented by one or another product or service, you are not fully human. This is the defining aspect of the enlarged middle class, to coin a phrase in the largest sense, meaning neither aristocrats nor the working class, mentality. Though dissatisfaction may be expressed in the working class at times, this modality of thought does not have the same force. The working class, in fact, is the presence of the cyclical man in our capitalistic linear society. He bears the same relationship to it as did the American Indian. This may explain why he is attacked and viewed in violent opposition by the ruling class and the enlarged middle class which supports the ruling class. The working class, though not adverse to comfort, thought, or personal growth, is not fundamentally dissatisfied with itself. That is, the worker doesn't think that at bottom he is a piece of worthless shit that needs to prove his worth. This is why the working class, what the Marxists call the proletariat, is hated by the ruling class. Class war is simply the conflict of the linear with the cyclical. This dissatisfaction with oneself is also what limits the enlarged middle-class mentality from seeing outside of its own fundamentally dissatisfied perspective. Consider the following analysis of Noam Chomsky by tentatively a convenience.
Putting Chomsky in his place, tentatively a convenience. I'm an anarchist. An anarchist is a person who's against rule by. In other words, against rule imposed on anyone by an external authority. I'm also working class. I worked for 47 years to support myself, fairly poor most of that time. Noam Chomsky, despite his reputation to the contrary, is not an anarchist. He believes in rule by an elite that includes himself. Chomsky has been an illuminating analyst, a person with a very clear mind, a person who can look at and analyze international political situations and see their oppressive sides, and the lies that are used to justify these oppressive sides. He's also someone who's fairly wealthy, someone who's been told his whole life what a genius he is, someone who flies to wherever the political action is. People dote on him. But more of these people should realize that if they can't even afford the public transportation where they live, but Chomsky can afford to take a jet to talk with them, that there is an important class difference at work. Chomsky will never lead the life they do. So, no matter how intelligently he seems to address their struggles, he'll never truly get it. Never. I remember reading an anecdote from Chomsky, probably in a book entitled Understanding Power, the Indispensable Chomsky, in which he mentioned that he lives in an upper-middle-class neighborhood. The story goes on to say that a less financially well-off friend of his was driving to visit him when he was stopped by the police and interrogated. What was he doing in this neighborhood? Chomsky recognized that this was an injustice, but did he really get it? I don't think he'd ever be able to. Such things have happened to me many times. I get it. Chomsky has come out against anti-vaccination people. That would include some of the blockading truckers. He suggested that the unvaccinated be put in isolated areas so that they don't pose a danger to the rest of us. He further suggests that we aren't responsible for feeding them. This we is apparently the royal we. Chomsky is speaking for the people because he fancies himself their representative. Funny thing about this is that Chomsky does not represent the people who grow the food. After all, he's not a farmer. Nor does he represent the people who transport the food. After all, he's not a trucker. So if anyone's in a position to stop the food supply to anyone, it's the very people that Chomsky's against. If the truckers are interfering with the government because they feel oppressed by that government, I suggest that it's because they are oppressed by that government, and that as pragmatic people who have to do pragmatic jobs that keep things going, they're doing something pragmatic to put an end to this oppression. Chomsky, on the other hand, a supposed anarchist, has come out in favor of government and against the worker. Fancy that. Maybe that's because he's an ivory tower intellectual, a member of a privileged elite who's never had to get up at 5 a.m. day in and day out to do grueling physical labor. Here's one online version of what Chomsky has supposedly said. People who refuse to accept vaccines, I think the right response for them is not to force them to, but rather to insist that they be isolated. If people decide, I am willing to be a danger to the community by refusing to vaccinate, they should say then, well, I also have the decency to isolate myself. I don't want a vaccine, but I don't have the right to run around harming people. That should be a convention, said Chomsky. Enforcing is a different question. It should be understood, and we should try to get it to be understood. If it really reaches the point where they are severely endangering people, then of course you have to do something about it, he added. Speaking on YouTube's Primo Radical on October 24, Chomsky said that for the unvaccinated people who are segregated from society, how they obtain groceries should be left up to them. How can we get food to them? Asked Chomsky. Well, that's actually their problem. Note that he initially says, I think the right response for them is not to force them to, but rather to insist that they be isolated, but then goes on to say, if it really reaches the point where they are severely endangering people, then of course you have to do something about it. So what exactly is this something that has to be done? It seems like use of authoritarian force to me. It's obvious that Chomsky believes in the dictates of the ruling elite that he belongs to. He believes in the medical-industrial complex. People don't decide, I am willing to be a danger to the community by refusing to vaccinate. They decide that vaccination is a danger to themselves and reject it on that basis. Chomsky makes it seem as if people are deciding to be a danger to the community, and that that's their sole reason for choosing to not be vaccinated. I doubt that there is a single person in the world who fits that description, and Chomsky's propagandistic use of such false logic shows him for what he is, just another propagandist for ruling elites. I'm sure that one skill Chomsky still has is the ability to read. I highly recommend to him that he read Eleanor McBean's The Poisoned Needle. But not just in any edition, some of the editions suspiciously deface major aspects of the book. I suggest that he read an edition that includes the page numbers, the illustrations, the correct formatting, the index, the bibliography, etc. Then I suggest that he reconsider his received opinion that vaccination is safe and for the good of everyone. It isn't. And lose the royal we while you're at it, won't you, asshole? Of course, Chomsky is far from alone. If they're preaching to you from on high, regardless of whether it's Bill Maher or Amy Goodman, looking at their social position should be enough of a clue as to whether they can be trusted or not. According to Wealthy Gorilla, as of 2022, Bill Maher's net worth is $140 million. Bill Maher is a famous American political talk show host who has worked on numerous television networks as a commentator, including Fox News and CNN. As one staunch Democrat friend of mine told me not so long ago, all's fair in love and war, but my retort to that is that there's no love in war, and if love isn't fair, what good is it? I don't mean to neglect the competing propagandists, such as Tucker Carlson. Carlson's despicable, but I'm concerned here with keeping house, with pointing out the despicability of people who purport to speak for the likes of me. They don't. I respect much of Chomsky's analysis, and I get the occasional laugh out of Maher. But I'd never be so foolish as to think that they're working class or on the side of the working class. They aren't. They're propagandists working for the elite institutions that they're part of. It's interesting to note that Tucker Carlson's net worth is reputed to be considerably less than Maher's. Tucker Carlson is an American political commentator, author, and TV personality. Tucker Carlson's net worth is $30 million. Tucker was a CNN commentator from 2000 to 2005. From 2005 to 2008, he hosted a show on MSNBC. He went to work at Fox News in 2009. He began hosting a nightly talk show called Tucker Carlson Tonight in 2016. Outside of television, Tucker is the co-founder of the website The Daily Caller. He is also a published author and columnist. Of course, I got that info online. I have no way of knowing how accurate it is.
Third Mail by Dick Turner. Tentativelys text accurately sums up the limits in the capacity of judgment found in the members of the enlarged middle class. They simply cannot see or imagine certain things, even when effectively they are geniuses. It gives proof of the importance of class in the formation of our consciousness, how it can block our very capacity to see. It brings to mind the medieval maps where unknown territory was marked with the warning, "Here be monsters." Conclusion. If any phrase to have emerged during the pandemic sums up the current problem we are facing, it must be that of Bill Gates, who said that the problem in the West was freedom, and that China didn't have the same limits. What he meant was supposed to be useful in a managerial way, that there are many things which could be more effectively implemented if the average person had no say in the matter. Of course, he is correct. For example, the whole population could be forced to be repeatedly vaccinated, which he feels is a good thing. Then this idea would extend further, making for the ease of implementation of any idea deemed good for us. Dictatorship makes the implementation of top-down planning much easier than does free and open debate and the right of the citizen to say no. These are the crossroads where the West finds itself at the current moment, the crossroads of a commitment to ever greater freedom or ever greater control. It is my belief that cultures are the expressions of a fundamental generating idea. To use a popular modern model, let me say that these generating ideas bear the same relationship to a culture as DNA code does to an individual. In the West, there is one idea that underlies everything else. That is, everything else is a development of this idea. This basic idea is freedom. The idea of freedom, or perhaps the ideal of freedom, for perfect freedom is a goal towards which we as a culture strive constantly, is the basis for all the developments in the West, at least since the first peasant revolts. We are caught at this current historical moment between freedom and what I call managerial totalitarian society, which is nothing more than totalitarianism organized upon a business model. I suggest that only the first of the options, freedom, can work if the West is to continue to exist, and that the second, managerial totalitarianism, will effectively cause its ruin and downfall. The West, and particularly France and America, have been, since they declared the universal rights of man and the Declaration of Independence, symbols of human freedom. Freedom is what the West does best. It is the best part of our culture. It is what has led to the abolition of slavery, the concept of inalienable rights, free speech, etc. All the things that, as they say, our forefathers fought and died for. Besides that, it is our greatest export. People all over the world used to look at America as the goal to be attained. Like everything in the real world, this was part truth and part myth, but as a motivating principle, it was unquestioned. What we have seen, slowly and surely, since the beginning of the First World War and the ending of the Second, is the gradual erosion of these principles by powerful interests. Whether it be the Federal Reserve System, the experimenting upon its own citizens, the assassination of imagined dissidents, the powerful have sought to ever extend and solidify their power. A few names, now known to everyone, will suffice to illustrate what I mean. The Rockefellers, the Rothschild family, the World Economic Forum. These groups are seeking to impose their managerial totalitarian programs upon us. This is no conspiracy theory on my part, just as it is no secret on theirs. It is clearly written in their charters and can be read about on their websites. They are proud of it and are slowly revealing it to the West. It isn't difficult to understand from the managerial perspective why the Chinese model is superior. The boss gives orders, these are followed, that's it. No discussion, no debate. But this model cannot work in the West, for it goes against the West's basic reality. However, from the managerial perspective, the answer is simple. You give the order and implement it, like a new business plan. It is a sad demonstration of the limits of the managerial mind indeed, for them to think that such an idea could be entertained even for an instant. Yet, here we are. Of all the things that the West does, the pursuit of freedom is the greatest. It is the hidden goal behind all our art, culture, and science, even when detoured by the machinations of greed and selfishness. It is the generating ground where everything starts off, and the culminating point which all our actions are in search of. Even in its imperfect current state, it is what we do best. It is tantamount to our soul. If we lose our freedom, then we lose our soul. If we lose our soul, then we will have lost everything. In a free society, the logical goal is the realization of total freedom. That is, once you start something, you don't stop halfway, you go the distance. Freedom is a risk, but it was always a risk. That's what makes it freedom. If the selfish objectives of a few people who pool their immense resources actively seek to limit your freedom, then one's choice is simple. One must always choose freedom. Patrick Henry said, "Give me liberty or give me death." In fact, there is no other choice, at least for us, because the lack of liberty is itself death. I understand the motivations of those who would impose managerial totalitarianism upon us. It is very human to want to protect one's assets, just as it is very human to believe that one's perspective is better than that of another. This kind of logic exists on all levels of society, but when it becomes a program in the hands of a small number of people who control banks, the media, and governments, it moves away from just being an element of human nature and becomes the mechanism of absolute tyranny. What else can it be called? This translates into something very simple as a plan. Whenever a choice between freedom and something else emerges, we must simply choose freedom. This would, therefore, as an example, suggest abolishing the Patriot Act and Homeland Security. It would simply mean the application of the Constitution to its fullest extent, as well as its furthest development. It would ultimately mean the abolishment of all forms of authority that are imposed upon the individual and not freely entered into by mutual agreement. The ultimate goal in a free society is that its citizens be as free as possible. Hannah Arendt has pointed out in On Revolution that the only truly free people are those who write the laws under which they live. If this is true, then the path is clear. The citizens must make the laws. How can this be done? Again, all questions are easily answered once freedom is chosen as the operative mode. There are referendums, laws that can be tried and repealed if not effectual. In short, things would have to be tried. Success isn't guaranteed, but neither is failure certain. For as mentioned above, freedom is a risk, but a risk worth taking. Freedom is the meaning and adventure of our lives. In a word, the answer to everything in a free society is freedom. Anything else, no matter how attractive, seductive, or seemingly expedient, is a lie.